Thank you. We're one of the big two leading densely populated cities. I think very much right. But for the school board, I stand last year, municipal elections for city council.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Censorship in America, Understanding Its Impact on Democracy. My name is Brianne Palmer. I'm a senior legal policy advisor at Democracy Forward, one of the many people who helped to put this on today. I'm so excited that you all are here joining us either virtually or in person. We are so thrilled to bring you an incredible panel of experts and activists. I hope that we learned a lot today. A couple of housekeeping notes. You might notice some note cards on your seats. Those are for questions. We'll have a Q&A session near the end. You want to write your question down. Some of us will come around and collect those questions. You can ask the panelists towards the end of our briefing today. There's lunch and water. There's a lot of box lunch, y'all. Please take some. Feed your families, feed your roommates. With whoever you feed, please take a box lunch. Without further ado, I'll introduce our CEO and president of Democracy Forward, Skye Perryman. She's also serving as our moderator today. So I'll give you Skye. Take it away.
Thanks for making time to join today. And just a note, we have a lot of folks on Zoom who we're happy to also be able to see. And so if you need to get up and get lunch, which we encourage you to do, please just try to go around on the side so that we're not blocking our colleagues and friends on Zoom. And if you are on Zoom and you have a question, please feel free to write them, and we'll try to take in-person questions and some. I am incredibly excited as the president and CEO of Democracy Forward to have this group here with us today, and incredibly grateful to Congressman Rep Raskin, who has been such a leader on democracy issues, which include anti-censorship issues and education for all students in the country. I do believe the Congressman may be able to stop by. We're not sure with his schedule, and if he is, we will take a pause and allow him to introduce himself and say a few words, and then we will proceed with the panel. At Democracy Forward, we use the law to build collective power and to advance a bold, vibrant democracy on behalf of all people. And we have been supporting organizations as well as individuals throughout the country, including in states like Florida and Texas. We also have LDF with us here today that's been supporting organizations and individuals throughout the country as well, and including in states like South Carolina, to talk about the incredible threat that censorship is having not only on the education of our students and of our children in the country, but also on democracy itself. And so without further ado, let me introduce you all to the panel, and then we will start some questions, and then we want to take some of your questions as well. So first, to my left is Nadine Farid Johnson, who is the managing director of PEN America here in Washington. She leads Washington's office and is an attorney and advocate with a focus on democracy, human rights, and governance. She has a wealth of experience in public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and she previously served as the executive director of the ACLU of Kansas, and is a former U.S. diplomat, law professor, and litigator, and we are so grateful that you are here today. Next, we have Junhee Lee she is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She has been with LDF for more than 14 years in various roles, including in a senior deputy director of litigation role. And she is the first person to hold the Strategic Initiatives Department, the director role there. Jen is an architect of the LDF Pro-Truth Initiative. She oversees the Justice and Public Safety Project, the LDF Voting Rights Defender Prepare to Vote Project. She is a phenomenal litigator, a federal former law clerk, and a former Fulbright scholar, and we are so excited that you are here with us today. Next, I have Terrence Martin Sr., who serves as the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers and the vice president of the American Federation of Teachers. Terrence is a Detroit native, a product of Detroit Public Schools, a former second grade teacher, and previously served as the Detroit Federations of Teachers treasurer. He also serves on the Michigan Education Justice Coalition in the 13th Congressional District Democratic Committee. So we are very excited that you made it in today to be with us. Thank you so much. Chris Tackett is a parent, an advocate, and an activist in Texas. He is from Granbury, Texas, and he has joined us today. He has been on the front lines of fighting in his school district in Granbury, Texas, against the removal of books from public school libraries. He is passionate about public education, campaign finance, and politics. We're going to talk about education and censorship today, but he's passionate about a lot of these things. We're also excited to have Stephana Ferrell from the Florida Freedom to Read Project. She also has several of her colleagues with her today from Florida who came to Washington to be here that hopefully you can speak to on the break. She is a parent award-winning professional photographer based in Orlando, Florida, and is the co-founders with her cousin, Jen Cousins and Reagan Miller, began parent activism after the Orange County Public School System banned the novel Genderqueer. And she's leading on the ground efforts in Florida against censorship. I will also pause and acknowledge, and then I'll get to AJ when we're talking about Florida. We also have activists here from Gen Z for Change, including Olivia Juliana, who is in the audience, and many of these folks in Gen Z for Change have also been incredibly active, especially in Florida with the Florida Freedom to Read Project. So we are excited to have you all here today. And then last, but certainly not least, is AJ Davis, who is the co-founder of the Lowcountry Black Parents Association. He is a teacher, a parent, and activist. He has been heavily involved in efforts at the state level to block anti-truth legislation in South Carolina. And we are incredibly excited and honored that you are here today with us as well. So that was a lot of information, but we wanted you to understand who you were going to have the opportunity to speak with today. And without further ado, I will just start by asking, maybe we'll start with Nadine, if you could describe for us what censorship is and what it means to you.
Sure, and I will start by saying thank you so much to Democracy Forward and to our fellow panelists. It's really a delight to be here on behalf of PEN America. I think I'll answer the question by starting out talking a little bit about PEN America, because what we do is to work to ensure that people everywhere have the freedom to create literature, to convey information and ideas, to express their views, and to access the views, ideas, and works of others. Censorship is an affront to all of that. Censorship is the infringement upon that freedom. It's an effort to suppress words, to suppress images, to suppress ideas, and to suppress information. And it is a detriment to democracy.
Thank you. Jen, do you have other any other sort of contributions to this notion of what censorship means and the work that you and your colleagues at LDF do?
I think when we think of the word censorship, we often think about First Amendment rights, just as PEN America has been such a leader in protecting. But the way that we think about this at the Legal Defense Fund is not just censorship, but discrimination in terms of the topic that we're talking about today. Because this is not an issue of, a difference of opinion, a valid viewpoints, or a suppression of a disfavored viewpoint or a controversial viewpoint. What we're talking about is the silencing of truth about inclusive history, about the accurate recounting of race discrimination in our country, but not only history, it's also about speaking truthfully about the continuing inequalities, both race inequalities as well as inequalities based on LGBTQ+ identities that continue to exist in this country. And it's unfortunate that we're even having this briefing, although I'm really glad that we are, because it's such an urgent issue. But the reason I say it's unfortunate is because we should be having a briefing about how to advance equality in the educational system. Our educational system continues to be broken. It has gross inequalities, and yet we're spending time and resources trying to push back falsehoods and conflict that doesn't even exist. And so for us, that is what is at the core in terms of the censorship issues facing the country right now.
I want to ask, before we turn it over, because we want to hear a lot from the parents that are on the ground, as well as Terrence, who is supporting teachers in so many ways and the impact on the various communities that are here. But just back to Nadine and Jen for a moment, can you talk to us about the most concerning trends that you're seeing beyond the ones you've just laid out? We know that a lot of media covers censorship as efforts extending or efforts in public schools, but we're seeing reports that it's actually far beyond that in libraries and bookstores. Or is there something that could you all enlighten us about those trends or any other concerning trends that you're seeing in this moment?
Sure. I think one of the disturbing trends, and it's not a new trend, it's just kind of a refashioning of something that's happened before. But that is the notion that any discussions or acknowledgement of race is somehow in itself discriminatory. And that, I think, is at the core of this this onslaught of state and local actions that really are prohibiting efforts to have honest and important conversations about race, acknowledging race, also acknowledging that there are racial inequalities, and it's our duty to try to do something about them. And so we have that in the legislation, which let's be very clear, we already have civil rights laws that prohibit race discrimination, sex discrimination, and so forth. And yet these new prohibitions are clearly attacking very specific efforts to try to advance racial equality and equality based on various identities. And it's no coincidence this is happening on the heels of the largest civil rights movement that this country has ever seen. And when there was widespread acknowledgement that we needed to do something about racism, especially anti-Black racism. And then we see this kind of this proliferation of these state and local legislation efforts banning these kinds of conversations. In real life terms, what that means is that it's some schools are wondering if acknowledging Black History Month is discriminatory. They are their teachers are afraid of using words like social emotional learning or racial equity. Right now, those are considered bad words or proxies for what some of these proponents of this type of censorship is prohibiting. And this is having real life consequences in the lives of schools, especially the students of color and LGBT+ students, because what we need to be doing is making it more inclusive, more diverse, more equal. And believe me, there's all kinds of problems going on in terms of school districts all across the country. And yet even those very few school districts that are trying to make those kinds of improvements are now being attacked for somehow being discriminatory when they are in fact trying to do something about discrimination.
Thank you so much for that. Before I turn it to Nadine, Congressman Raskin's been able to take time out of his schedule to be here today. So we already thanked you earlier, Congressman. We're really excited and thank you again. And if you have a few moments, we'd love to allow you to make a few remarks. This briefing is about censorship in education and its threat to our children and to our future, but also about its threat to democracy. And we see you such as a leader, both in defending democracy and in combating censorship, and appreciate you being here and hosting this event.
Thank you very much. Forgive me for being a little late here, and we're still trying to get the January 6th report done, so I'm busy with that today. But I wanted to stop in to thank you for putting this on and to thank Pan America and your group is
Democracy Forward.
Democracy
So
Forward, yes. But I want to thank all of the groups for getting together. It's just critical. The authoritarians, the autocrats, the bullies, the despots all over the world are on the march, and they are very clearly targeting kids and students and schools and the educational process, and that they understand well the Orwellian dictum from 1984 that he who controls the past controls the present, who controls the present controls the future. So it's all about rewriting the past and particularly blotting out any facts that would be uncomfortable for people supporting insurrection and right-wing reaction in the country. And it's not critical race theory that they oppose, because they don't know the first thing about critical race theory, and nobody, of course, teaches that. They barely teach it in law schools anymore. They certainly don't teach it in third grade. But it's critical race facts that they're trying to destroy and to try to evict from the public schools. They're trying to terminate teaching about racism and Jim Crow and the slavery experience, because it might make certain students feel uncomfortable. They imagine that every white kid in the country is as much of a snowflake as Donald Trump and just can't handle the truth about our history, which is ludicrous and absurd. These anti-memory laws are being pushed all over the world, in Putin's Russia, in Orban's Hungary, in El-Sisi's Egypt, in Duterte's Philippines, and of course in Trump's America, or what they would like to be Trump's America. So we've got to understand that the war against history, the war against memory, the war against education and teaching are taking place everywhere. And so the struggle to defend democratic freedom and education in America is linked to the struggle to stand up for democracy and freedom all over the world. So what you're doing is important. The subcommittee of oversight, which I chair, the Civil Rights, Civil Liberties subcommittee, has had 2 different hearings about academic censorship and book banning. More than 2,500 books have been targeted on LGBTQ themes, on racial themes, on, again, anything deemed politically incorrect by the right-wing powers that be. So we got to stand up for freedom, for our teachers, for our students, for our communities, for our families, for our parents, against this, authoritarian assault. So thank you for what you're doing. I wish I could stay because I'm fascinated by what everybody's got to say, but I'll get a report later, and I appreciate your invite. Yeah.
Thank you for. Right. Thank you, Jen, for your remarks just before Congressman Raskin arrived. And then, of course, he also highlighted many of the concerning trends that we're seeing. So before we talk with Terrence about the impact on teachers, and then our parents and activists that are here from on the ground in states and local communities where censorship is alive and well, Nadine, do you have anything else that you'd like to add around the concerning trends that we're seeing?
Sure, thank you. I think it's really important to recognize that this is a movement that we are seeing. It is concerted, it is organized, it is deliberate, and it is happening all across different places. And the way we were able to track this in America is to actually find lists that were sent from place to place. I mean, either being sent from place to place because they have the same typographical errors, the same titles, the same information, and it's being used to silence and it's being used to erase. And I think that it is imperative that we are privy to this understanding and this knowledge, and if we use that to our advantage so that this ostensible use of something that is potentially or ostensibly legal is not used to undermine education as is happening now, nor to undermine what's happening in our libraries, right? Nor to undermine public education as a whole.
It is a movement that's important because it's not just small and discreet as people would like you to believe. Terrence, why don't you talk with us, given your longstanding advocacy for educators, for students, and for educators, about the impact of censorship on teachers and what trends you see and are concerned about.
Well, thank you all, first of all, for having me. It's a privilege being next to folks from Texas and Florida, because I think a lot of what we've experienced, we've learned from what has happened in Florida and what's happened in Texas, and we've tried to learn from that, and really drive things in Michigan and particularly in Detroit in a forward direction. One of the reasons why folks that I represent become teachers in the first place is because there is a level of freedom to teach. We go into the profession wanting to draw on our personal experiences, our lived experiences, the things that happen to us each and every day, and bring what's happening in society into our classrooms to teach children. And so the sheer thought of having to censor folks, ban books, and not teach real, true history is really an attack on that very premise. What we have seen in education is that this has helped to contribute to the teacher shortage. And I don't need to tell the folks in this room about all the attacks that have happened to educators over the last couple of years and even further beyond that. But what we are seeing are folks being handcuffed, our teachers being handcuffed, and not being able to really teach and provide the quality education for our students that we would love to be able to provide. In many Black communities, the school is essentially the hub of that community. And it's a place that our students go to feel safe. There's a place that our students go to feel loved. There's a place that our students go to get the very basic needs met each and every day. And to not be able to do that in its wholeness and its fullness, meaning talking about what happened to George Floyd, talking about what happened to them the night before in their neighborhoods, shootings that occur, to be able to discuss homelessness in our schools, our students struggling with their identity, self-identity. These are all things that students also have the freedom to come to school and to be able to discuss, be able to deal with, and look to their teachers and other school professionals to assist with these. And so now when you have a group of people who young people look to for guidance and acceptance and love, being told not to do that. So now we create a society where we're really not respecting, appreciating, and loving each other. And one of the things that I wrestle with is really the reason why we don't want to teach true history, or we don't want to really deal with real life issues. If you don't like to hear it, then here's the opportunity for you to do something to change it, as opposed to censoring teaching and learning in our schools.
Thank you. I know Chris Tackett will tell you a bit about also the impact he's seen on teachers in Granbury ISD in Texas. But Chris, as a parent, do you want to talk to folks here and share what you've been facing in Granbury ISD in Texas, as well as your broader efforts on censorship?
Sure. Well, I'm a former school board trustee, right? So I had the opportunity to serve the district from 2014 to 2017. And, you know, Granbury, Texas is a very conservative community, like lots of other, places in Texas, and has always been, and we knew that. But our district, with a new superintendent who came in, decided to start banning books, pulling books to review. And the intent was, as near as we can tell, was to do a lot of it in darkness, just kind of make books disappear from the shelves. And I actually had people who were inside the district who knew me and knew I would stand up and say something where they couldn't, who let me know what was coming. And so I started doing what I knew I could do as a parent and started filing public information requests, because I knew the information was there and what they were doing. Started making sure those became public. My daughter and other students who were in the high school decided to take up and push against what was going on, and started speaking at school board meetings, speaking up for the diverse books that were being pulled. Because the reality is, a lot of the books that were being pulled off the shelves, over 65% of them were LGBTQ themed books. Another 15% or so were race and racism, and there was sex ed was another 10 to 15%, right? So all of these things that were considered threats, and this wasn't coming from like radicals outside the district. who were saying we should do this. This was the call coming from inside the district, from the superintendent initiating some of these things. He was recorded in a meeting with librarians saying, we're a conservative community and we will be conservative. And if you don't agree with it, you'd better hide it. In the meeting with librarians, told them there are only two genders. And, that's how we're going to move forward. And it's about the transgender, the LGBTQ, and the sexuality in books. That's what we're pulling out. So, I mean, those are the things as a parent, right? And knowing there are incredible educators in the district who believe in education is much more than just the 3 R's, right? I mean, your public school is that place where you learn how to interact with people who are different than you are, how to go explore and learn the 3 R's, right? I mean, that's so essential. So teachers are starting to leave the district at higher rates than we've ever seen before. Great teachers, those who have the ability to go somewhere else, are leaving. And it just, breaks my heart for my district. And look, I've had people from all over the state reaching out, dealing with the same things, which is all really related to white Christian nationalism. I mean, that's, as Nadine talks about the organized movement, that's the root of all of this. The goal is to break public ed, and it's one community and one school district at a time. And that's where again, thank you guys so much for inviting me here to talk about this, because it's not just in my community or this community or that community. They're going after the whole country. And breaking public ed's the goal. So we have to raise our voices and push back wherever we can.
And thanks for acknowledging the role of white Christian nationalism. I'll just acknowledge that we have tremendous advocates here in the audience, including the president of the Interfaith Alliance, Paul Rauschenbusch, is over here, and some of his staff that has really been doing a lot of work to try to combat Christian nationalism, as well as I know many of folks in the audience. And so that link, and we'll get to that more broadly when we talk about democracy, I think is just is incredibly important for people to hear the stories from the ground. All right, let's talk about Florida. And how, I mean, first of all, just, in greatest darkness, there is light, and the Florida Freedom to Read Project has been so inspiring to so many for what you've done in your local community. And so that's what I wanted to focus on, to see if you could share. I think DeSantis gets the headlines of all of the censorship and that his administration is pushing in the state of Florida. And if you could talk with us about what local communities in the state can do, and what you've been doing and seeing, and the threats to your children and to children in the state.
Sure. So let me just start by saying that Jen and I, when we started, we were just two parents in a room. And the book was read aloud by a proud boy in our school board meeting, and the performance had impact, unfortunately. The impact it had on Jen and I was to go and read the book because we wanted to know why the book was in our schools and how it could support our kids. Unfortunately, leadership in the room made the decision to, instead of going through the policy of reviewing the book, we had a solid ALA trusted policy of reading the book in its entirety, having a community review the book, and determining whether or not it held value for our students. They decided they were just going to go ahead and remove it. And so we said right there, we're going to push back. More challenges came to our district. They came to nearby districts as Moms for Liberty started to emerge. And we started to research, and we found this movement in Florida actually started in 2017. So regardless of what the headlines say, parents opening up backpacks in 2020 and 2021 and seeing, oh, I don't like that book. It actually started with Florida Citizens Alliance in 2017 saying, we're going to go ahead and make it so that any citizen can challenge a book in our state. And they started attacking climate change at that point and LGBTQ plus books in K through 12 because they should not be there according to them. And they didn't really get much traction. They're a retiree group out of South Florida, and they needed a face. And along came Moms for Liberty. And so we had Moms for Liberty, Florida Citizens Alliance working together. They developed their lists, they put them out into the communities, and they just started attacking. The first couple of areas that that we saw, Polk County, they caught the boards off guard. They went against their policy. They took in challenge forms from Florida Citizens Alliance from South Florida. And that trend continued. So there was solid policy that our leadership avoided. In certain cases, Florida Citizens Alliance was just able to send an email to someone in leadership that they knew, and leadership said, hey, I need these books pulled. It didn't matter what media specialist wrote back and said, we've got a policy for this, let's do this. They're like, no, we're just gonna go ahead and pull those books. And so it was trends that we saw. And so we kind of started researching a little bit more and figuring out, we've got to file these public records requests, transparency laws that were coming about to protect parental rights were not helping us. They weren't getting us the information that was happening inside the districts. The districts actually stopped putting some things in writing. So it took us building relationships with our media specialists, getting out into the school board meetings and saying, we're going to hold you accountable. This is the policy that's on paper. Do not take these books from our kids, because we either have the right to read and learn or we don't. There's no middle ground. And so we just keep pushing back. And there were already, luckily in Florida, parental groups on the ground in different communities that were kind of fighting for protecting public education. Those, Florida Citizens Alliance, their main goal, like Chris said, dismantling public education. Their two founders served on a board with DeSantis in 2018. Back then, they were saying we want education, not indoctrination. And the whole idea of woke and everything like that is just to build distrust from the parents. And so our goal is to empower parents to speak up, to see that this is all a facade. Don't take the words pornography and obscene on face value. We all learn in kindergarten, don't judge a book by its cover. Read the book, find out for yourself, see the value in it, see the value in the work, and then stand up for it.
Thank you. And AJ, we are incredibly grateful that you are here as well, and would love to hear both about what you're seeing in terms of censorship and harms in your community in South Carolina, but then more broadly, to talk about your efforts in the South Carolina State Legislature on anti-truth bills and your role in co-founding an organization that is on the ground fighting for the ability of people to receive equitable education.
Well, again, thank you for this tremendous opportunity. I'm grateful to be here. I like to think of my state as the state that wants to be Texas and Florida. It seems as though that's the direction my political leadership wants. I unfortunately have to sit here and say how we just elected a state superintendent that wasn't qualified at the time of her filing, meaning she did not have the requisite master's degree, which is required by state law. So she got what we like to term in South Carolina, the microwave master's, a 55-hour master's degree in 7 months from Bob Jones University. She has been school choice, voucher, parent, pro-parent rights, pro-censorship, anti-woke, anti-CRT. And she has just taken the reins and put out basically the equivalent of a hit list of individuals, including organizations like mine, that she says she is going to fight against as the leader of our state educational system. That's literally what we're fighting right now in South Carolina. And I think to the point about groups like Moms for Liberty, I am from Charleston, South Carolina. We just had a recent school board election there. Out of 9 seats, 5 of them were acquired by Moms for Liberty candidates. North of our county, which is Berkeley County, you may have heard about the story where the superintendent was fired by the 6 Moms for Liberty candidates. I was in the room when that happened. So I got to see that face to face. And I've been tracking Moms for Liberty, at least in my state, for about a year and a half. And what's really scary is how little people really knew about them and understood what they were and what they were doing. And how organized. I think that's the thing that I want everybody in here to understand. Not only are they a movement, they're political. They are a political movement that is well-funded and well-connected. It's not just, oh, well, they're talking to leadership. They're talking to the leadership. In my state, they are connected to our governor, lieutenant governor, our attorney general, members of our education subcommittee. South Carolina's legislature is pretty much as red as you can get it. We just got our new committee appointments, and our education subcommittee only has 5 Democrats and I think 15 Republicans. So, and pretty much I would say 80 to 90% of those that are on this committee are aligned with groups like Moms for Liberty. That's literally what we're dealing with. And I was able to last year as well to become a part of a statewide coalition called the Pro-Truth SC Coalition, through wonderful organizations like LDF and the South Carolina ACLU, as well as members of our Jewish communities and the LGBTQI. And I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize from both a parent and a community perspective is that these efforts, while we're talking about book banning and censorship, these efforts are designed to erase entire groups of people. It's not just about, well, we don't want a kid to read this particular book. It's we don't want these people to exist and our children have to talk about them. That's what this is. And they're using schools, in my opinion, because that's where you have probably the largest and most consistent captive audience of young people. If you want to influence what happens for generations to come, you go through schools. And so if you can control the language, the curriculum, the ideologies that are shared in schools, then you can control how your future generations will not only think, but act. If you normalize dehumanizing groups of people just purely because you don't agree with their right to exist, then you pretty much set the tone for what I call cultural and social genocide. And that's not even hyperbole. The fact that in 2022, we're still talking about the rights of gay people and trans people, and Black people, Jewish people, and other ethnic minorities after we went through during the mid-20th century where civil rights was the watershed moment for what we thought was progress, but yet here we are. Again, that's what this is. We're back. This is civil rights 2.0 or 3.0, according to how you want to look at it. And these people really want to turn back not only the hands of time, but they want to make sure that we don't even have the opportunity to fight back this time.
That is a powerful segue to a question I wanted to just open it up to the group about, and then we'll take a few audience questions, which is censorship and anti-censorship efforts as a democracy issue. That it's not just about education or just about a book or just about a library or just about one person group, it's about democracy. And would love to hear your reflections. And I think AJ started us off incredibly powerfully with his reflections on the relationship between censorship and democracy and the threats that we're seeing and what that means for our overall project of democracy in this country. Terrence.
I'll start. Betsy DeVos was from the state of Michigan. You can boo. Spent millions and millions of dollars to try to silence the city of Detroit. It was her plan, very strategic, very politically driven, to simply dismantle public education in the largest Black city in the state. And that's not by coincidence, that was by design. And the theory was that if she could get to Detroit, then she could control the rest of the state. And so when we talk about censorship, when we talk about its relationship to democracy, she wanted to simply strip that. She did not want Black people, brown people, poor people to have a say in their child's education. And so putting those two together obviously are extremely dangerous. And it's something that we have to continue to fight against. And it's one thing that Betsy DeVos didn't realize is that there were Black women in the city of Detroit who weren't going to let it happen. And I think she underestimated the folks that were on the ground and how important their children and this school district and the city were to folks who just simply weren't going to let it happen.
Any other reflections? So we are getting some questions from the audience, but go ahead.
Well, I'll just say, because in Florida, we've got HB 7, which is the Stop Woke Act. We've got HB 1557, which is parental rights in education or don't say gay. And then we have K through 12 education, which is 1467. What we've seen is that our state will be working on a whole different set of facts and history. My kids are in 1st and 4th grade. So right now they're going through the social studies standards where they're talking about segregation, Reconstruction, and the civil rights movement. And I actually compared what they learned this year to what will be available and approved next year. And they have removed in 4th grade from Studies Weekly, is the publisher that Orange County uses, they've removed references to people being segregated based upon skin color. So they do an entire article on segregation without ever mentioning skin color. They talk about Rosa Parks being asked to move her seat and not choosing to move, but not saying why she was asked to move. And so these are very scary things. And it happened because honestly, it goes back to the spring when the governor made the false claim that there was woke curriculum in our math textbooks. And no publisher wanted to be on the other side of that when we've got 5 of the 10 largest school districts in the country in Florida. They want those contracts. And so they're going to take the most conservative understanding of a very vague law. And they're going to write their curriculum to get approval and not be the woke curriculum that gets reviewed by the Florida DOE. And we're seeing it on the other side with our sexual orientation and gender identity. Leadership are pulling books from K through 3 that happen to discuss to same-sex parents or, LGBTQ+ kids that are going through questioning their gender identity. But they're not pulling books about boys dancing ballet or this boys survival guide. Those 2 discuss gender identity. They're not pulling books with mom and dad. Those 2 discuss sexual orientation. So we understand in Florida what he wants with the law. And DeSantis has already proved that he'll go ahead and just remove elected officials and appoint who he wants. And so we're dealing with all sorts of threats, and our school administrators are not really willing to follow their policies and rely on their policies because they're afraid they're going to get removed. And so we see things that are happening all the time. And we cannot move forward as a united country if we are raising kids that are, have a different understanding of our history, but also less tolerance, as you were saying, less tolerance and understanding and empathy for other people and their lived experiences.
Okay, let me go to Jen, and then I'll
I just wanted to just say, one of the reasons why this issue is just so important to us at the Legal Defense Fund is because we see this as a direct through line from one of our most famous legal victories, which is the Brown v. Board decision. And in that case, the Supreme Court unanimously recognized that public education is the foundation of citizenship. That's why it was so important to have racially integrated public education. And also recognize the importance of affirming the humanity and the equality of Black school children. And that is a promise that we're still trying to achieve to this day. We've never fully achieved that equality. And here we are talking about some of these issues that are happening on the ground. And I think one of the most important reasons why everyone should speak out against this, is including federal lawmakers, anyone who has a soapbox, a megaphone, is because of the chilling effect. It's not just the laws themselves that are being harmful, but the chilling effect that any kind of effort to be talking about racism or trying to remedy racism or sexism or anything like that, or homophobia is going to be discounted because school districts have work to do. They don't want to be engaged in litigation. They don't want to be engaged in these public fights with the school boards and things like that. And what's really, really remarkable about all this is that these kinds of laws have been found to be unconstitutional. So we're not talking about laws where it's up for debate. You know, this began with former President Trump's Executive Order 13950. And LDF was a part of a litigation that challenged that focused on federal contractors. But there was a federal district court in Florida in a separate case brought by Lambda Legal, where a federal district court judge issued a preliminary injunction finding the language in that executive order to be unconstitutional. And it's that language that has been copied in these state laws that you're seeing in Florida and in other states. And it's not just the K through 12 system, it's also in higher ed. So we're talking about colleges and universities where you're supposed to have open debate. And we've been involved in a lawsuit again where we secured a preliminary injunction against the Stop Woke Act in Florida because the law is unconstitutional. So it's just so important to be speaking out about this because what's happening is unconstitutional laws are proliferating and creating unnecessary litigation and silencing and creating obstacles to the important work that educators need to be having.
We also know that there's a strategy in some courts to just, and in some states to just pass unconstitutional laws.
Exactly.
In order to try to test that theory, which of course we've seen in other contexts. AJ, you were going to say something, and we're getting some questions in. So if you make your point, and then it's one, we did get a question for you around the role of grassroots organizations in building coalitions to fight groups such as the pro-censorship groups like Moms for Liberty. And then we got some other questions around that some of you all may have insights on in terms of what impact this type of pro-parent rhetoric. I mean, you're all parents. I'm a parent, you know, many of us are parents. You're all parents who are doing the work on the ground. What is the impact of that rhetoric? That they go ahead and enlighten us on the points we're going to make.
So yeah, I just wanted to say in South Carolina, I know we're talking about in the instance of public education, we currently have a extremist wing of our General Assembly called the Freedom Caucus. As of me being here today, they are actually suing 2 school districts in our state. So we have elected officials that are suing school districts. My district is one of them for book censorship. The other part was that in our fight last legislative session, one of the bills that they had sought to not only censor what was being taught, but it also sought to eliminate programming that could be associated with either public education or the nonprofit sector. And the language of the bill had it as such that if you were found to be in violation of this provision, which was similar to the Woke Act, South Carolina, again, trying to be your little brother, that you would, if you received state funding, you had to return all of it, and you were banned from receiving any additional funding for a period of 10 years. So it's not just, oh, we want to keep certain things out of our public schools. We want to basically sterilize the ecosystem of education, learning, conversation, progress, and things of that nature. To the question about organizing coalitions, honestly, it was just a matter of sitting and being so pissed off watching what was happening and watching it in real time, sitting in school board meetings where, you know, in most school boards, at least in mine, you only get 3 minutes to talk. And then they don't say anything back to you in most cases. It's just, oh, we're here to listen. And you watch that over and over. You watch the violations of policies that are in place and nothing's being done. And so you start saying to people, are we going to let this happen? And, you know, people come and what I've noticed with a lot of folks, people tend to not know what their power really is. That's the first thing you have to overcome when you start doing grassroots organizing. The difference between authentic grassroots organizing and what I call on the other side that astroturf activism is we do this from the heart. You know, we don't have mega donors. We don't have dark money out here. You know, I don't know who the Koch brothers are. You know, they cut me a check, you know, maybe, but you know, we don't have those individuals. And so helping people understand that it wasn't just a singular thing, that this is something that impacts all of us. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles in organizing is because people hear it like, oh, it's education. Well, I'm not associated with education. No, this is society. This is people. This is humanity. This is democracy. And by allowing them to do what they're doing here, they're not going to stop with schools. So by couching the conversation that way and helping to find common interest amongst organizational groups who may not have thought they had common interest, that's how we were able to gain a level of success in South Carolina.
And on that note, one question we got was with the mention that Chris mentioned white Christian nationalism, which is at a root of some of this white supremacy, white Christian nationalism. And have you seen a role of sort of, you know, a positive role for local sort of religious groups or communities, or, you know, how have you seen any of that? Is there space for that? You know, in any of the advocacy that you all are doing?
I think there's definitely space for it, right? I mean, but the thing, depending on the community you're a part of and the level of vitriol that we see playing out in a lot of this, it is intimidating to whether you're a faith leader or just a parent or an organization, right? The goal is to intimidate. I mean, the point about, you know, how does it erode democracy? The idea for most of us is we don't look for conflict, right? We are trying to not be in the middle of some of those things. And as the rhetoric gets more heated and more angry, a lot of people will step away and say, I'm not going to play in that space anymore. And we see the same thing in some of those faith spaces. It's becoming so noisy in the community. I won't necessarily step in and do that. There's absolutely room. You know, one of the organizations that we've been very involved with and try and amplify where we can is the Christians Against Christian Nationalism organization run by the BJC. They've done fabulous work. Locally, we've got a group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Pastors for Texas Children is where they're based out of. And they do a lot of advocacy against Christian nationalism and amazingly supporting public schools, right? From a faith perspective on why it's so important to do that. So I think there is lots of room for partnership, but you have to get past the angry element that is, look, Paul Weyrich in 1980 in Dallas, Texas, to a group of religious leaders, gave a speech talking about goo-goo government and the fact that, hey, you know, these people out here saying we want everybody to be involved in our government. Well, we don't want that. We want the fewer people voting and being involved because it's more likely that, again, from Paul Weyrich's perspective, we'll win elections that way. So all of this is designed to be heated and ugly to make people disengage from the process so that they can gain the levers of power. That is what so much of this noise is about. It's destroying the things they don't like, but it's also destroying our democracy one brick at a time.
May I add to that quickly? Yes. I think that's an incredibly important point. And I also want to note that it's meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be the tsunami that it is. We've been hearing from colleagues from these different faiths that are the unfortunate dubious leaders in this movement. We're talking 4 million students across the US who are affected by this. 32 different states, 5,000 school districts, 4 million students. And that's only in the last school year. We don't yet know. We've been working on it at Penn America, trying to check the data for this current school year. That's an incredible number. And again, it's meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be exhausting. And that's why it's so important to know the facts and to be able to speak to them.
We're getting at the 5-minute mark and we're going to be mindful of time. And so folks that are joining us by Zoom, or if you're in the audience and I haven't been able to read out your question, I do have some few questions we're going to end on. You can email your questions to info@democracyforward.org. And we actually can see and talk to each other after this panel today. So if you email your questions, we will share it with the panelists. And if you email, if you want to be engaged, folks will be here after to talk to you, but you can also email it to us, info@democracyforward.org. We will connect. We love connecting people. That's part of democracy. So we will connect and do that. There were 2 questions that have come in a lot, like many of you have asked these questions. One, which we only touched on briefly, is this notion of pro-parent rhetoric, and we don't have that much time. So I don't know, Nadine, if you have, or Terrence, and I don't know if you've seen this, but sort of the impact, is there any way to sort of flip that script? Because what we see, and I know what Jen sees in her work, what we see is so many parents like Florida Freedom to Read, like AJ's group, like Chris Tackett, out doing this work. So that's one. And then we are going to end on a hopeful note, and because we've gotten a lot of questions about sort of what can give us hope in this time. So that will be the final question. But does anyone want to speak to the sort of pro-parent rhetoric, and if there's a way to really reflect what we see in the country, which is millions of parents concerned about this for their kids?
Yeah, one of the things that we experienced in Detroit, when we really hit rock bottom, having many of our schools closed, the state took over our district for a significant period of time, left us with nothing. When big business leaves the city, they take their children with them. And so, the loss of population in our city, we hit rock bottom. And when religious leaders in your town start losing members of your church, then you start to look. When students go home and they tell their parents, "Hey, I didn't have a teacher today. I hadn't had a teacher all week." People start to pay attention. And to go back to something that AJ said earlier, about grassroots organizing. We partner with, for years, our union has worked in the silent, but we partnered with people who were left after all the dust settled and still cared, right? And so it became a pretty clear group of folks that you can certainly connect with. But parents were really the drivers of that. And for a lot of folks, the one thing that I rest with is parents still appreciate and believe in public education. And I think if we lead with that spirit, that we're all in it for the right reasons, I think it helps to get us to a place. Now, it's hard listening, and we have different viewpoints of how things should be. But the sheer premise that parents are still going to send their kids to school and they want the best out of it is one thing that we try to really hone in on in our city.
And if you, yes.
So there were a few counties that offered a parental opt-out on their libraries, in an ability to say, we're going to honor parental rights. We're going to allow you to choose how much access you want your child to have in your school library. 2 counties started off, the default was opt-out. 1 month into the school year, one county realized more than half of our students still haven't had those forms turned in. They switched to an opt-in. The other county is still at an opt-out. And there are kids where 2/3 of the kids have had their parents turn in forms, but because 1/3 have not, they're not going to the library. In other areas though, 7 other districts share their information on opt-outs. Only 1% of students are restricted by their parents. And that's in Florida, and those are mostly very red counties in Florida. So the whole notion that, a majority of parents don't trust their teachers or their educators to make and select books or make book selections is just wrong. The data does not show that. And so to end on a hopeful note, we need to engage those parents. For the most part, we're not going to drop our kids off for 7 hours a day with people we don't trust to pick out books, right? We just don't. It's a bad narrative. And the idea that this is a culture war that we're fighting, it keeps the regular parents from tuning in and stepping up and saying, this is not what I want. I want robust, inclusive public education. It's why I chose public education over all those other choices. And I'm here to support.
Any other comments? And then did you?
Oh, no, I was gonna share with that. I was gonna say my whole piece too.
Great.
I think for me in this process, I've been grateful to have such organic diversity. I mean, our coalition as a state has pretty much everybody in it. Jewish community. We're working on our Hispanic and Latino community. Our transgender and LGBTQIA community is come through in ways I could not have possibly imagined. But the reason that I'm able to sit here and have the passion and the knowledge and understanding of education today is because of one group that I want everybody to hold up when you leave this room, and that is Black women. Black women are the backbone of not only the fabric of our society, but when you look at public education and you talk about Black families, 9 times out of 10, Black women are at the forefront. And if you juxtapose how you have groups like Moms for Liberty, which are primarily white, middle-class women, and you look at Black families, Black women have never gotten the elevation of their concerns regarding public education like these groups have. And that's something that the media has not reconciled during this time, that we have to understand when you're looking at school board meetings and you're looking at parent meetings, that's who's there. But they're also the ones that are out here on the front lines carrying water to make sure that our public education system remains a democratic institution that benefits all.
That is so. Chris?
Well, I think it's, the hope is in things like this, right? In places where we're all raising our voices together and acknowledging that we're not the only ones out there who feel this way. That's what gives us power, right? It is the collective of our voice. I mean, the reality is, whether it's Betsy DeVos, whether it's Tim Dunn in Texas, I mean, there are billionaires funding and pushing a lot of this narrative. And if we are going to push back and truly be effective in this, it takes the grassroots, right? It is the power of our collective voices is the only thing that helps us win this fight, because it truly is a fight we're in the middle of. And things like this panel, the work that all of you are doing in that space, it is what gives the regular parent out there who's trying to deal with this knowledge that there are others who are out there who will help, who will help amplify your voice, connect you with others who are feeling the same thing, fighting the same thing. And that is what gives me hope walking out of something like this today.
Terrence?
You know, we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, the losses that we've experienced and the attacks on public education and our freedoms. But we don't spend enough time talking about the wins and the victories that we've had. We're not out here losing, just taking L's. We are winning. And I think that's important for us to continue to talk about, continue to be in concert with each other, and have these conversations, but really take time to celebrate the victories that we have. I mean, many of us have saved school districts. Many of us have beat back ban of book policies in our states and local municipalities. I mean, so we have to do a better job of really celebrating that, because we know that around the corner is the next fight and the next challenge that we're going to have to face. But let's spend some time really celebrating the victories that we have, because we've had many.
Jen?
So one of the great privileges we have at the Legal Defense Fund is working in partnership with so many amazing community organizations and community stakeholders like AJ Davis, who work really closely in South Carolina, but we also work closely with parents and students in South Lake, Texas, and Georgia and Florida. And working with these people on the ground, you can't help but have hope, because it's amazing the work that they're doing oftentimes in their free time on top of their jobs, and then their parents, you know, being a parent and so forth. And you see the commitment and the humanity and the generosity and love that these people bring to trying to ensure the best public education for their kids and generations afterwards. And so, you know, it's that in itself is very inspirational, and also really just gives us the mandate that we have to live up to that level of commitment. And that's why I have faith, because the people that we encounter on a daily basis are the people who truly represent what this country is about. And when we talk about multiracial democracy, we do live in a multiracial democracy with wonderful people, and we should celebrate all of them in order for us to really achieve our fullest potential.
Nadine?
I have hope because of educators and because of librarians. And because of lawyers, not. But in all seriousness, we have already a cadre of incredible professionals who know what they're doing in our schools and who know how to put forth an impressive and longstanding and informative system of education. And that's what gives me hope.
Thank you all. You all give us hope at Democracy Forward, and I know at all of your organizations, we know the fight for democracy is at bottom, the fight for people. And so that's what this is about. We know that censorship is deeply unpopular with the American public, that parents and communities want to learn, they want to have the best education for their children, and that this is an extreme movement, I think you used that term, that is threatening what so many and what the vast majority of people want in this bold and vibrant democracy that we continue to hope to improve and to advance and preserve. So thank you for being here. There is lunch in the back. If you're online and you weren't able to get your question answered, please email info@democracyforward.org. And if you just want to connect with someone, we will get you all connected. If you're here in the audience and you can't say to meet who you want to meet, let us know and we'll be happy to send those emails. And we are incredibly grateful for the time that you all took in this moment to talk about such a critical issue. And we have to keep the fight going. So thank you all.